The boy was scolded by the teacher for the third time. It was because his family couldn't afford to buy him a notebook, so he had to write his homework on a scrap piece of paper. The teacher tore his homework to shreds and kept questioning him. Nima had no choice but to lie and said that he left his notebook at his cousin's house. But the teacher didn't believe him at all. He had heard this excuse countless times before. Luckily, a classmate stood up and claimed he was Nima's cousin. He gave Nima an extra notebook. Their cooperation saved Nima from getting into trouble. Afterward, the teacher warned everyone to always write their homework in their notebooks and not forget to bring them to school the next day. He also specifically told Nima not to repeat similar mistakes again. If there was another time, he would be expelled. All the children were frightened by this warning and listened quietly until the class was over. When the school bell rang, they all rushed out of the classroom like wild horses and started playing wildly. Suddenly, Nima fell and got his only pair of pants dirty. He was afraid that he would be beaten by his parents when he got home. Fortunately, his deskmate Ahmed was very friendly and comforted Nima, helping him clean the wound and pants. The two of them were best friends, but Ahmed's family was only slightly better off than Nima's. When Ahmed returned home, he wanted to finish his homework quickly, but his mother always had assignments for him. She ordered Ahmed to change his little brother's diapers first. As soon as Ahmed finished, his brother got hungry again. His mother asked Ahmed to prepare some syrup for him this time. Ahmed thought he could finally finish his homework, but his brother started crying again. His mother asked him to rock the cradle. After a while, his brother fell asleep. Finally, Ahmed had time to do his homework, but he realized that he had an extra notebook. It was Nima's. Ahmed felt guilty and knew that if he didn't return the notebook, Nima would get expelled. He carefully told his mother about it, but she thought Ahmed just wanted to go out and play. Ahmed showed her the evidence, the extra notebook, but his mother still refused to let him went that far to deliver a notebook. However, Ahmed persisted and eventually angered his mother. The more impoverished a family is, the less power the child has. Their right to speak was always taken away by their parents. They can only keep their words to themselves and gradually become the timid and quiet children that the adults describe them as. Ahmed hadn't written much of his homework when his mother asked him to go outside and buy some bread. After thinking for a moment, he saw this as a good opportunity. He dodged his mother's gaze, grabbed his homework book, and ran off. He planned to use this as an excuse to go find Nima. Through winding and twisting paths, he crossed over mountains and went through forests. After a series of adventures, he arrived in Pashte. But Ahmed didn't know where Nima lived. No one along the way knew either. The whole village seemed like a huge maze with occasional appearances of animals. Suddenly, Ahmed ran into another classmate, but the classmate didn't know where Nima lived either. However, he did tell Ahmed the location of Nima's cousin's house. As Ahmed headed towards the cousin's house, he suddenly saw a pair of brown pants. Didn't Nima wear the same pants today? Ahmed immediately called out Nima's name, but there was no response from inside the house. He asked the mysterious old man nearby, but the old man had no idea who Nima was. Ahmed had no choice but to wait. Finally, the owner of the house came to collect the pants after a while. But after talking to him, Ahmed found out that they were just the same kind of pants, and this wasn't Nima's house. Ahmed had to set off again to find Nima's cousin's house. When he arrived at a crossroads, Ahmed finally found it. He climbed the stairs and stood in front of the door. It was indeed Nima's cousin's house, but they had just left for Koker. Wasn't Koker his own village? Ahmed immediately rushed back home. Once again, he passed through the quiet forest, crossed over towering mountains, and walked along the winding path. When he anxiously returned to the village, he saw his grandfather chatting at the entrance. He wanted to walk quickly past, but he was spotted. Ahmed had no choice but to truthfully tell his grandfather what had happened. But in fact, his grandfather had already seen him crossing mountains and valleys. After listening to him, his grandfather asked him to go home and get a pack of cigarettes. Although Ahmed was in a hurry, he had to obey his grandfather's authority. However, as soon as he turned around, his grandfather told the people around him that there were actually no cigarettes at home. The cigarettes were with him. This was just a way for him to teach Ahmed to obey his elders, and he believed that children were meant to be ordered around. The old man next to him felt that this was a twisted philosophy. Plus, the child's intentions were good. But his grandfather believed that children needed to be disciplined more when they were young so they could adapt to society when they grew up. The other old man felt it was absurd, but since it was someone else's grandson, he couldn't argue. Before long, Ahmed returned from home and said that his mother hadn't found any cigarettes. His grandfather asked him why he didn't search again. But Ahmed was very anxious. He hadn't bought the bread yet and he hadn't delivered the homework book either. Meanwhile, a merchant who was standing nearby approached Ahmed and asked to tear a sheet of paper from his homework book. Ahmed firmly rejected his request because the book belonged to Nima and he wanted to take good care of it. However, the merchant ignored his explanation and forcefully took the book. Ahmed looked to his grandfather for help, but in order to let him handle it himself, his grandfather chose to stay out of it and ignored him. As the homework book was torn apart, Ahmed felt a sharp pain in his heart. But suddenly, Ahmed heard the merchant mention that he came from Pashte. Ahmed began to ask the merchant if he knew Nima. However, the merchant was too busy talking to someone else and completely ignored the child's inquiries. Why do adults always ignore children? Is it because they are short and can't be seen? The merchant finished his conversation and rode off on his donkey. Ahmed didn't want to give up his only chance, so he immediately chased after him, following the donkey on the winding road. After a relentless pursuit, Ahmed once again arrived in Pashte. The merchant called his son to help with the goods, and a boy who looked similar to Nima came out of the house. Ahmed was overjoyed, but when he turned to him, the boy wasn't Nima. The boy told Ahmed that there were many people named Nima nearby and asked if he knew what kind of work Nima's family did. Ahmed thought for a moment and only had one clue. Nima had once brought a can of goat's milk to school. The boy told Ahmed the location of the goat shed in the village. By now, the sun had hidden itself for rest and Ahmed was gradually surrounded by darkness. Just as he was lost in confusion, a warm light appeared. The carpenter next door opened his window. After hearing Ahmed had come all the way from Koker just to deliver the homework book to Nima, the carpenter decided to put down his work and accompany Ahmed. The childless carpenter guided Ahmed through the dim lights. Although Ahmed was in a hurry, he slowed down his pace. The old man proudly talked about his work, but now people prefer to use iron doors and windows, saying that they can last a lifetime. But iron is so cold. The old man washed his face by the well and picked a flower for Ahmed, suggesting that he could put it in the homework book and it would look very nice. The old man couldn't walk any further and pointed out that Nima's house was just up ahead, asking Ahmed to go alone. Ahmed arrived at the door and realized that it was the merchant's house. Ahmed ended up circling back to where he started. But after thinking about it, to avoid making the old man blame himself, Ahmed secretly hid the homework book and told him that he had already delivered it. The old man slowly sent him to the village entrance, but it was already late. Even though he still hadn't bought the bread and hadn't delivered his mother's request, Ahmed did not rush the old man. However, the old carpenter was really out of energy and let Ahmed go back on his own first. So he sprinted all the way, but as soon as he arrived at the intersection, several big dogs blocked his way. Soon, the old carpenter caught up. He said he was worried about this and came to accompany Ahmed. Then the old man escorted Ahmed to the village entrance because that was as far as he could go. From there, Ahmed had to rely on himself. Back home, Ahmed didn't deliver the homework book or buy the bread. Fortunately, no one blamed Ahmed this time. After thinking it over, Ahmed decided to write 2 sets of homework. He really didn't want Nima to be expelled. The next morning, as the teacher began checking the homework, Nima handed in several pieces of scrap paper. He kept his head down and dared not look up. The closer the teacher got, the harder it was for Nima to control his tears. Fortunately, Ahmed arrived in the classroom just in time. He whispered to Nima not to panic. Then the teacher walked up to them. Both of them nervously watched as the teacher marked their papers. Luckily, the teacher did not notice anything unusual. Ahmed's work was good, while Nima's was excellent. Finally, the teacher flipped to the next page and found a small, warm yellow flower tucked in between. Where Is My Friend's Home is an excellent Iranian film that contains no violent scenes, yet the presence of violence is felt throughout. Iran has many outstanding children's movies, such as Recess and Children of Heaven. These films portray the harsh realities of the outside world by depicting the innocence of children's hearts. If you want to watch more excellent Iranian films, leave a comment below and let me know.